Hello everyone, Ron again, and in today's video we're going to talk about flangers. So in the last video we spoke about the chorus effect and I was describing how it works. Flangers are actually very similar, so let's get into it. But first, let's look here, because I've been explaining these things using MiniSynth, which does have the chorus effect. It doesn't have a flanger, but it makes logical sense to explain the flanger next because they're so closely related. And then it makes sense to explain phasers. So that's what we're going to do. But if you understand Fruity Chorus, you would understand how to use this chorus effect because it's a lot simpler. I realized that I did not go over it in the last video. So, whoops. In any case, on to talking about flangers. So, to understand flangers, as I have come to understand them now, because I did some research to make this video, to make sure the information that I was given would be as precise as possible. I actually looked on isotope.com. They have different articles that break all this stuff down, but it's a lot to read. TDLR, and honestly, that's the point of watching the video, right? So I figured I could just do that because I'm down to read it, because I want to know so I could be more intentional about how I create these different sounds, as they say in the article. So the way they described it involved the term interference, which was a term I had heard before, but never really associated with musicality. Interference is what it sounds like when two sounds meet, and it describes the relationship, how the relationship of those two sounds affect them both. So you have constructive interference and destructive interference. And so when a sound is 180 degrees out of phase, that is an example of destructive interference, and the two sounds will cancel. Constructive interference, an example would be when you have two of the same sound and they're aligned perfectly in phase, so the amplitude increases and it becomes louder. Now they specify in this article that I was reading that that usually doesn't occur in nature, which of course not, because the sound is made once, and what two things would make the exact same sound? That would be strange, because maybe a creature could, but every creature is unique, right? Like we are, down to the fingerprints and our voices and even time. So this happens with us digitally because we can create an exact copy of the sound and control how fast it plays. So what the flanger effect does, like the chorus, it does duplicate the signal as well and modulates the delay time of the copy like the chorus effect, but it only makes one copy. And it combines those two copies together while modulating the delay time to create either resonances or phase cancellation. So that's the purpose of explaining it from the perspective of interference, because at some frequencies there are going to be increases in the frequency, and at some frequencies there are going to be cancellations. So it made me think, when understanding that maybe Fruity Chorus had 3 LFOs because it makes 3 copies. I had not actually considered that before making the video, but maybe that's why they didn't explain it. If that's the case, they probably just figured you would realize that, because when you increase the LFOs, the sound does become thinner, and if you overdo the chorus effect because it's creating so many copies, it does lose its potency. And that's something I had noticed was happening, so that's a little bit extra, just relating back to the video about the chorus effect. So let's look at this EQ right here before I go into examples and all that. What you have here is a different type of filter that I did not explain because I went over low pass and high pass filters, but this is called a notch filter. And it is what it sounds like. It creates a notch in that frequency pocket. So it will leave the surrounding frequencies alone and it would decrease those basically as much as it can. When you have a series of notches, that's called a comb filter. And actually, I didn't know what a comb filter exactly meant, so this has really been good for me. It was awesome when you teach somebody and then you wind up learning yourself. So it's going well. Today is a good day. Every day is a good day while you're alive. So with that being said, we can eliminate this because it's just there to explain that one point. We can look at the plugin. So how does Fruity Flanger work? Here you have the delay time I spoke about. I didn't test creating a flam with this one, but I'm sure it could do the same because it just creates one delay. Especially because it just creates one delay. So if you turn off the LFO and the depth, then it would just be a flam if you applied it to a snare drum. And that is really useful to know. So anyway, this is the minimum delay time of the copied signal. Depth is like it was in the chorus effect, where it gives you the increase that the LFO rate will provide. Rate is the LFO. Increasing it will make the delay modulation sweep happen faster. And depth tells you how far it's going to go. So it's this value plus this value. This is the minimum. And when you add this, the combined total is the maximum delay that's going to happen. But it's just one signal rather than the potential of 3. Dampening is canceling out the higher frequencies so it's not as harsh. And that happens the more you increase it. There will be less high frequency. Phase is like stereo from Fruity Chorus. It widens the sound. It changes the phase correlation between the left and right channels. So it's going to make it sound wider, or it's going to reduce it and it's going to make the effect become mono. At the highest, it's 180 degrees out of phase or completely out of phase. Shape controls the shape of the LFO. It's either a sine wave or it's a triangle. Feed feeds the signal that is output from the flanger back into the input of the flanger so it can be processed a second time, because that is a thing that flangers do. To create an effect that is more pronounced, it is output and then it goes back to the input. Invert feedback inverts the polarity of the signal that is fed. Invert wet just inverts the signal of the actual effect of flanging. Dry and wet. In music production, dry always means just the original signal with no effect on it, and wet is only the signal with the effect on it. And cross involves the relationship between the left and right stereo channels. It causes the left to go into the right and the right to go into the left. So with that being said, let's look at some audio examples and then call it a day. So we're going to begin by looking at a mini synth. And this is a simple sound that I made for this. It's running through this flanger. And if I press a key, you'll notice there's already some phase cancellation. But that's because there's reverb on it. So it is in mono. So now let's look at how adding the flanger to it affects both the sound and the phase of the sound. So you'll notice from looking at the vector scope that before I added the flanger, especially because it precedes reverb in the effects chain. Effects chain is another topic that I should make a video on one day. I love how making videos gives me ideas for other videos. It's so cool. So you'll notice from the vector scope that it is losing some information if it were to be switched to mono by virtue of the information being outside the 45-degree angle. But it's not as much. When I added the flanger to it, it was below 0 a lot more. And remember, -1 means completely out of phase. So the closer it is to -1, the closer it is to totally disappearing in mono. So this is at 118 degrees, and it added a bit of stereo width. But whenever using an effect like this that uses phase, you have to be careful about whether it's going to destroy the sound when you convert it to mono. So that's why I keep showing the vector scope. Obviously, if you have a vector scope, you can choose to be careful that way, and Ozone Imager 2 is free, so you can have a vector scope without having to buy one. It's just an important consideration. So moving on to the next example. FL keys. So let's listen to how it changes the timbre of this piano, because this is an example where you would want to use it to just change the way it sounds. So you would notice that after having heard both examples, that the timbre of the sound changes considerably, but it does sound really cool. You know, you can tweak it to sound however you like it. And of course, you can change the mix level of how much of the sound is going to be the processed or wet version and how much is going to be the original, so that it won't be too much. That's a good way to try to avoid phase cancellation. So, last thing, just for fun, we're going to see what it sounds like on my voice, because Nectar has a flanger. So here goes. Does it sound really different? Does it become wider as I increase the width? Does it become a different timbre as I increase or decrease how fast it moves? Do I sound strange? Do I sound like an alien again? Is the effect more pronounced? How does it differ from the chorus effect when I switch it to being a flanger? Consider that. And after you have considered that, consider how you'll use it to make some creative sounds and make your own music sound really cool. Or especially if you're doing something with movies, because, you know, I sounded like an alien. So it would be easy for me to believe that flanging was used in creating sounds for some of the most popular movies. And it's a great way to like be creative with whatever you want to do. It would be a really funny idea if you have an opponent in a debate and you want to emphasize your side because it's like comedic, and you just make them sound like an alien. That's something I would probably do. Or like a comedy skit, right? I wouldn't do it in a real serious thing, but maybe if I made some type of comedy skit and I was debating with myself, I would make my second self sound like an alien to emphasize what side I want to emphasize. But that's the flanger effect and how it relates to the chorus effect, a few differences between them, and how they sound. And with that, I thank you for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end. And as usual, have an awesome day.